Welcome to the Expat Edge with Marcus and Matt, where we answer your questions about becoming an expat to help you thrive abroad.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Expat Edge. Today we want to talk about something a little bit different. We want to talk about how when you visit a country as a tourist, it might not necessarily give you the best representation of the country as it would be if you were to move there and live there as an expat. We have some examples from our own lives, but Marcus, when I first went to Russia, I actually had, the idea immediately came to my mind, like I would love to live here. This would be such an interesting place. I did end up going there and living there, and most of the time that I spent in Russia was great. Obviously, it's different now, but there are other countries that I've been to where it was an awesome tourist destination, but I don't know if it would have been a great place to live as an expat necessarily. I'm sure you've had similar experiences. Let's talk about maybe some of the things that people should look out for as a tourist that, if they're considering moving there, what they should maybe also look for.
Yeah, I've heard it. A lot of tourists are going on their trips. They're excited, seeing something new, and they say something like, "Oh, I could see myself living here," or
right,
something to that effect. And I think, with my experience now being in Russia, Germany, lots of time in Turkey, I could certainly see myself visiting many countries, but not all of them. Like hardly any of them would I say I would love to live there long term, just because there's so many cultural differences. One example is now I'm living in Germany, and I do consider myself an expat, even though I have a German passport. But I work from home. We speak English. I don't speak perfect German, but I struggle to sometimes do daily, bureaucracy and things like that. So my first example is really, I enjoy my time in Germany. I can't see myself being here long term, and the reason is that I just don't. My personality clashes with the culture of having everything planned out and the bureaucracy, and I see some things that I just couldn't see myself living here long term, even though there are so many great places to see and visit as a tourist.
Right.
Can you think of some places that you've been that maybe wouldn't be a great, not to say they're bad, but it just doesn't work for you?
My favorite country I've ever been to from a tourist perspective was Lebanon, and it's probably not the best country to live in. Although that said, if I were young again and no family, I think Beirut is probably an awesome place to live. There's so many things to do and see, and lots of great food, restaurants. People are incredibly nice. Unfortunately, the economic situation in Lebanon right now is really poor. But generally, I probably would not consider living in Lebanon because of all the problems. But that said, amazing tourist country. I've never been to another country that was as great as Lebanon from a tourist perspective. So that's the best example from my travels. I can give another example that my wife and I kind of disagree over. I would love to live in Southeast Asia, whether it be Vietnam, Thailand, or Indonesia. But my wife, has no real desire to live there. I've been to these places. I think there would be an incredible sense of adventure. And obviously there are things that are not perfect in that part of the world, but I think it would be a lot of fun, personally.
Well, I've said a couple times to my wife, like, how about we choose a place in South America, and something draws me to South America. I could see myself living in some of those countries, and my wife has, pretty much zero interest in going there. So I think actually the biggest factor is your personal preferences and a lifestyle and things like that. And you mentioned, as a single person, you could probably be way more flexible and have a good time in a lot of different places. Whereas if you have a family, it's different, right? Then you have to worry about education. And like, for example, Matt, we were both in Turkey recently, and I mentioned, hey, there's private schools here. Maybe we could spend a year or two in Turkey. And after doing all the research, even though I've been to Turkey so many times as a tourist, and we even have an apartment there, it just didn't feel right for my family, right? So that's not to say it wouldn't be the right place for another expat. I think it's a great place. But for the education, the goals in education that we have, it just didn't quite fit. Right. So, and then the language aspects and things like that. I think a lot of people will go to a new country as a tourist, and they'll see these new things they haven't seen before, and they'll think, oh, this would be a great place to live. But I think it's more just intrigue, and once you really settle down there, you might disagree with how they do a certain thing, or come to find out that it's not that convenient or pretty or practical. You don't know, the traffic. You don't know all these kind of like daily life aspects. So it's hard to judge as a tourist unless you really, for example, Bureaucracy is a great example. Mm-hmm. As a tourist, you never run into bureaucracy because you don't have to legalize yourself and go through paperwork and things like that.
Right. Although, most countries have horrible bureaucracy for all expats. There are very few countries, maybe Singapore, for example, but I'm sure people will complain about Singapore. I can't give any firsthand experience, but even the US is horrible in terms of bureaucracy. Even for citizens, we just don't really realize it. It's much more polite than a place like Russia. But it's still a pain in the butt. Right.
Well, if you're going to, if you're choosing countries to potentially live in just due to bureaucracy or the lack thereof, then that's probably not the best factor to judge it by. But that certainly is the case. That's just an example of something that you don't see as a tourist, right?
Right.
So,
well, I think one of the ways that people can go to another country and try to get a sense of what it's like to live there as a local. It's really difficult as a tourist, no matter what you do. And in some countries, as we kind of mentioned, you can tell from a tourist perspective that it's probably going to be difficult as an expat here. But then there are those countries that you go to and you get a very good impression as a tourist, and you also get the good impression as a tourist, but kind of forward thinking about what it would be like as an expat. What do you think people can look for, Marcus? One of the suggestions I was going to have was, if you stay in an apartment, it's going to give you obviously a very different view on what it's like. You could run into internet troubles, or you'll have trouble with hot water, whatever, in an apartment that you probably would never have in a hotel, even a kind of middle of the road hotel. But what other kind of suggestions would you give for people if they want to potentially live there as an expat? I think my first suggestion would be just to go for at least a month.
Yeah, I have two things that come to my head right away. One is based on my experience in Tunisia, beautiful. But once we went outside of the hotel, it was like, I wouldn't stay here long term. Right. So definitely, when you're as a tourist, you want to leave the resort, the hotel, go to different places around town. And if people are saying, it might be dangerous or something, then that's probably an indicator of not a favorable location. But that's the first thing. Like, explore outside of your group, your resort, and things like that, and see how local people react to you, how strangers are around you, and whether you'll feel comfortable in that kind of environment. You don't need to necessarily know the language to feel that atmosphere.
Right.
So yeah, go out and kind of explore. And then two, for sure, don't stay in the hotel as far as, go to an Airbnb or, some kind of private apartment where you would live among, the locals. So you could see day-to-day life, the quality of the building. And for example, in Turkey, one thing that, again, it's a great place, but one thing that bothers me is when when I need to get something done, it's like, oh, we'll do it tomorrow. We'll do it tomorrow. And I'm like, well, I'm here for 2 weeks. I can't do it tomorrow. And if you kind of live there constantly, maybe it depends on your personality. If you're laid back, then it doesn't matter that much, right?
Right.
If you're retired, then maybe you don't stress so much. So it's really hard to say. Any things that you would add to that?
Well, I mean, I would just say, getting out of the main, let's just use Moscow as an example, right? If you come to Moscow to visit, you're probably going to be staying either at an Airbnb or a hotel within the 3rd Ring Road. And it's going to be an amazing experience.
Right.
But once you live there, you're going to be living at Planerne metro station, and it doesn't look nice.
It's far. It could be far away.
So yeah, you could be far away. Well, you're very likely going to be much further away from the touristy areas. So you're going to need to try to understand what the infrastructure is like in those places. Actually, one of the best ways probably to figure it out is to go on Facebook and find the expat group for that city, whether it's Beirut or Moscow or Bangkok, and type in there and ask questions like, where do most expats live? They'll tell you, and then try to find a place staying in that area and see what it's like. You'll get a very different experience than staying in the touristy areas where, if you do any research, probably most websites are going to direct you to those touristy areas. So that would be my recommendation, is to talk to expats who are there, see where they live, and then try to stay some time in that area.
That would be, super insightful. And more people are doing that anyway. I think when you're going somewhere as a tourist, you don't think, oh, I'll connect to the local expats. But that's a really good idea. And another suggestion that I just thought of would be, so if you're going there as a tourist, or if you're there as a tourist, look at kind of some of the, what you could afford in your budget area, look at the local listings and things like that. So you can kind of picture yourself as an expat. What could I afford? And because when you go as a tourist, you might afford more, more luxurious hotel rooms and things like that. Right. So kind of take a step back and think, okay, what would I really spend on an apartment? What could I really get? And your hobbies and interests, like where's if you're interested in art, theater, obviously that Moscow would be a great place because that's everywhere. But if you're interested in the outdoors, like how long would it take me to get there without a car?
Yeah,
right? Because a lot of expats don't have a car.
Right.
So, those are some suggestions that I would have. And finally, I would say that when you're looking for videos on YouTube, start with the negative. That would give you a better view of what you don't want, where you don't want to go and live as an expat. Like 10 negative things about Bangkok or, I don't know, Berlin or whatever. And then you start with that and then go into the positive.
Well, what I would then even add to that is
try
to experience those negative things. So if you're going to go to Bangkok, first go on YouTube, see what people are saying are the negative aspects, and then go to Bangkok and try to experience them and try to understand, are these deal breakers for me? And if they're not, then maybe Bangkok is the right place for you. Because in every country, there's going to be negatives. Every single country has its negatives.
Right.
So if you try to understand what the negatives are, and you need to decide, are these deal breakers or are these things that won't really bother me? And I think you could try to figure out, whether those would bother you within 2 or 3 weeks in a given place.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. Start with the negative. Are they deal breakers? And then move on from there.
Right. So those would be our top tips for you if you're looking to try to decide if a place is right for you. Try to figure it out before you go and understand what the deal breakers are before you get there. We hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.
This was the Expat Edge with Matt and Marcus. We hope you enjoyed the video. Visit theexpatedge.com for even more content that will help you thrive abroad. You can submit your ideas for video topics and sign up for free at theexpatedge.com. See you there.